Hey everybody. Okay, so we finally get to talk about Labyrinth. So I wasn't sure if I was gonna do this movie this year since it was kind of logistically difficult, but yeah, ended up finding a way to do it anyway through the clips and kind of through the summary we were looking at. Yeah, so there's a lot going on in the story, and I think the film really brings together a lot of the themes that we've been talking about in all our discussions. It has sort of Jungian ideas. It has prop type fairy tale ideas. It very much feels like a fairy tale type of story. And it very, very effectively fits into that structure of Joseph Campbell and maybe makes it a little bit more understandable. So I think there's a lot to be said here about this story and how it connects to all these ideas. So yeah, let's just dive right into it. So so you guys all had your kind of comments on Labyrinth, and I'm kind of gathering all these thoughts and bringing them together here. But I want to give you my rundown of how this would look from kind of a hero's journey perspective. So what's the story we've got here? Well, we've got our protagonist. Her name is Sarah. She's a little insufferable at the beginning. I don't know if you could tell. That's kind of the hardest part of the movie, just because she's so intense and moody and young, in a lot of ways, kind of immature. But that isn't that the whole point, right? We said that heroes often need to go on a journey to grow as people, and Jung had the whole idea about mythology telling us stories about growing as people, which Campbell kind of builds on. So Sarah is someone who needs to grow. So she's our protagonist slash our hero. Hero in Campbell's sense, like I said, we can have female heroes. Joseph Campbell doesn't give like a very clear roadmap for what a female hero would look like, but I think Sarah kind of points us in that direction. She loves her fantasy films, which is interesting. She loves her fantasy stories. She's kind of practicing like a play or reenacting scenes from a book. It's not super clear in the movie itself, although I think there's sort of supplementary material that goes into a bit more. But she's sort of wanting to see herself in the story about a goblin king in his castle. And that's where we see her at the very beginning, is kind of imagining herself into this other world. So that's pretty cool. And she has some problems. She isn't getting along super well with her family. She has a stepmother who she isn't getting along very well with. And then her dad is just kind of there. He's like, he's not really trying real hard, and that's kind of a problem too. He just says, "Oh, hey," and the stepmom has to do all the work. So of talking to her, and neither of those situations work really well. So she's got this tension, and it seems like one of the big things of tension with her and her dad and stepmom is this idea of responsibility. Back at the beginning, she forgets to come home on time and she's late, and she was supposed to watch her baby brother, Toby. So there's going to be a big question over responsibility with her. And that's kind of going to be where she needs to grow. And what age do we think she is? Probably early teens, like 13 or 14 or something like that. Maybe a little bit older, but she has a certain immaturity about her that makes her seem pretty young. And one of the things we notice is that she, in addition to having this sort of relationship with her parents where she doesn't want to face situations, doesn't want to face her problems, she also has this sort of desire at the beginning to retreat back into childhood. So all of this starts because she makes a wish, and the wish has unintended consequences, which is something we see in fairy tales as well, like the Raven girl. That was a wish that had unintended consequences from the mother, who was tired of a crying baby. Does that sound familiar? So there's a very fairy tale component going on here. But what was it that actually caused Sarah to make the wish that that the Goblin King would come and take the baby away? Well, it was originally that the baby had her teddy bear. So Sarah has her own things, and she kind of is resenting this new baby that's coming into her life. And, that's kind of associated with the parents and the new stepmom. So she's resenting this baby. And she's also not exactly playing out this role of being an adult who takes care of the baby. She's acting she's supposed to do that, but she's acting more like a child who is jealous that the baby is taking her toys. She wants the teddy bear. Toby has the teddy bear. That's not good for her. That's not what she wants. So it's all, based around this sort of theme of, we could add to this, not wanting to grow up. And that's kind of connected to responsibility too, right? So she's kind of stuck in childhood in some ways, even though she is maturing. One of the things that her stepmom says is that she's worried about her because she doesn't seem very interested in boys. Her stepmom is saying, well, why don't you, take an interest in boys and go off and, have these interactions with boys? And so it's a sign that she's kind of not really following her path all the way to adulthood. She's not following the sort of order of growing up. Of course, people approach these things in lots of different ways at lots of different times, but let's kind of take that as a sign and say maybe there is a question about her relationships here. What does she want out? Her fantasy book seems to have something about the Goblin King in her story, so she's thinking about maybe some connection there. Let's put a pin in that, but say that maybe a fantasy realm is a place where she could explore this idea of growing up and going into relationships. Okay, so that's all the details on our hero. So what is our call to adventure? Well, I guess we've got the ordinary world and the world of the Labyrinth. But I think that's really clear in this movie, that there's a very clear ordinary world and there's a very clear magical world. So maybe we don't need to go into that super much, but I'll just note those down. How about our call to adventure? We kind of talked about it a little bit already. It's when she makes the wish, and then that causes someone to come into her life to cause all sorts of problems and chaos, even though it's something she kind of said that she wanted, but she didn't know really how she felt about it. So this is when she makes a wish. You might remember when the goblins are all waiting around for her to make her wish and saying, "Come on, say I wish." So they're waiting for the classic fairy tale type of plot. And so the call to adventure is basically a combination of the wish and the arrival of Jareth. So she wishes to have the Goblin King take away the baby, and then say, "Whoa, it's actually happening." It's one of those "be careful what you wish for" situations. The baby disappears, and this owl flies in the window, and it's very dramatic and scary. The goblins are being a little bit scary, even though they're also being funny. And then the Goblin King, he's David Bowie. So yeah, David Bowie does a great job as this character who is very compelling and charming at the same time that he's sort of frightening, especially at the beginning. So he is a threat. She's got a problem to overcome now, and her problem that she wants to solve is the disappearance of her baby brother. And Bowie, the Goblin King Jareth, tells her, she only has so much time before Jareth is just gonna kill before Jareth is just going to transform Toby into a goblin forever. Isn't that interesting? And isn't it interesting that Jareth gives her time? He could just set the clock to 0, but he lets her kind of have a chance, which is interesting, even though he's scary and frightening. Okay, so is there refusal of the call? There doesn't necessarily have to be. I think there's kind of a refusal towards adulthood that Sarah has. So there's a reluctance to mature, and she acts very frightened by Jareth, and regrets her wish. So maybe there's a theme of regret here. But ultimately, she is very determined that she does want to save her brother. So it's almost like she was sort of doing a refusal earlier just by making the wish, and now she's changing her mind. She's going to go off on the adventure. So how does she cross the threshold? Jareth takes her to the labyrinth. And that's a pretty big moment right there. And so that makes him an example of supernatural aid. You have a figure who helps you get across the journey. It's interesting that he's also the threat as well, or the opponent throughout this. I don't know that he's necessarily evil completely, but he is the obstacle, but he's also helping her along, and that's inherently interesting right there. And remember that the idea of the magical world can be very closely connected to Jung's idea of the subconscious. Why do you go into mythology? Why do you go into fairy tales? Why do you go into a magical world? It's because you're trying to wrestle with the things that are going on in your own mind. And there might be frightening demons or alarming, problems that you didn't know were there, or you just weren't willing to acknowledge. And now I think maybe Sarah, in going into the labyrinth, maybe we can interpret the labyrinth as her own mind in some ways. Even though it's also a literal thing in the story sort of stands metaphorically for all this stuff. So Jareth it gives her supernatural aid, which it's kind of a being brought across the threshold whether you like it or not. So I could see an interpretation of, Campbell calls this the belly of the whale, where just a whale comes up and eats you and suddenly you're on the adventure. That's a way to interpret this. That's his word for any sort of circumstance where you kind of get dragged across the threshold. Okay, but it's a little more complicated because there actually seem to be an awful lot of thresholds in this story. And so maybe we can say if crossing the threshold means you're going into your own mind, maybe crossing another threshold after that means you're going deeper into your own mind to things that are more repressed, more subconscious, and you're eventually going to have to reckon with what you find there. So we can definitely say she starts the road of trials. And this is the quest to get her brother. The path she's going on is from the outside of the labyrinth to all the way to the castle. So this whole journey, she's going to encounter problems, she's going to encounter solutions, she's going to deal with a lot of different things, but she's also going to have helpers and aides. So helpers, Campbell's word for them is mentors, like teachers in a way. We have Hoggle, who is a weird little oldish looking dwarf man. So he's a sort of strange character, just the type that Campbell would describe as being archetypal. A weird little old man helps you out. That sounds pretty typical for a hero's journey. So Hoggle's the mentor and helps her. Not at first, though. He's kind of reluctant, isn't he? He's a coward. But he does end up being helpful in the end, and he helps her a little bit initially and then becomes more confident in helping her over time. Then we've got Ludo, who appears as a big monster, but she immediately recognizes that he's actually really nice. He's a big teddy bear, and he can be helpful in his own way, even though it might not be obvious at first how he can help. And then you've got Sir Didymus. Not exactly... I think that's how they're spelling it. Not exactly sure how they're spelling it in the movie. But Sir Didymus is a wonderful little fox guy. He's like a fox knight who is riding on a dog. And I think it's very interesting that this dog looks very similar to the dog that she has at the beginning of the story. Except that Sir Didymus is... oh, no, wait. I think... I'm never going to be able to decide how to spell it. Ambrose, whereas Sarah's dog is named Merlin, but it's almost like her dog is one of the helpers who gets to appear in the story. So that's pretty cool and cute. So these things are coming from her in a lot of different ways. Okay, this is only the beginning. We will delve deeper into the labyrinth in the next video.